Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club as we continue to read the book I Will Die Free by Noble Alexander with Kay Rizzo, a remarkable story dictated by the young pastor Noble Alexander of his life in a Cuban prison, where he was determined to stay alive and remain faithful to his Lord inside the very gates of hell. In our last reading, we covered chapter 7, entitled To Fidel's Treasure Island, a Cuban prison styled after the Russian Siberian prison camps to which Noble and other prisoners were transferred after their court-appointed sentences. Some prisoners did not survive their transfer by truck and plane, so difficult were the conditions. Once there, our hero met two Christians who had been able to secure a few tattered pages of a Bible, and together they started up their church again. Their numbers soon grew, and their cell number 8 rang with praise, worship, and Christian hymns. Of course, this met with the anger of the guards, who shot at them, and many were injured by shards of concrete caused by the ricocheting bullets. But their faith remained unshaken, and Noble, as the leader, was called into the office of the captain of the headquarters. We continue our reading today with chapter 8, entitled The Caribbean Killing Fields. A guard marched me back to circular number 4. When I reported the commanding officer's ominous threat to my cellmates, a nagging question hung unspoken among us. What else could our captors do to us? How much more miserable could they possibly make our lives? All too soon, we discovered the answers to those questions and a whole lot more. I thought it odd when they fed us roast chicken, until the prison on the ground passed on the word. A heavy rain shower had flooded a large chicken farm in the area, and many chickens had drowned. Instead of throwing the putrefied poultry away, the prison cooks roasted the birds for the prisoners. The following morning we had milk, or at least what appeared to be milk. It was a powdered mixture, rehydrated, that was usually fed to calves and pigs. 2 days later, the guards gave us new yellow uniforms and high-top work boots. The uniforms, hated by the civilians outside of the prison itself, would forever classify us as political prisoners. The soldiers cut off our hair and made us pose for mugshots. We later learned that the prison security officer sent a lock of each prisoner's hair, along with his picture, to other communist countries for their records. From that day on, to Cuban officials, Humberto Noble Alexander ceased to exist. Number 30954 took his place. Later that night, we listened to and then passed on the latest news through the prison underground. Using all 6,000 prisoners at the Isle of Pines prison, the officials would initiate the Cienfuegos Plan, a plan to break the prisoners' morale and exploit the island's productivity through the use of slave labor. The Cienfuegos Plan originated with a pilot program called the Nanton Plan, named after its founder, a tough sergeant who treated his soldiers so brutally that he established a reputation for being the worst slave driver in the Cuban military system. Nanton had randomly picked 300 prisoners and ordered his soldiers to march them to the fields and work them until they dropped where they stood. The slightest delay in carrying out an order resulted in the prisoner's death. Out of the 300 men destined to be executed, only 12 were actually killed. 288 prisoners worked straight through without weakening, and of that number, 250 pretended to be re-educated. At the end of 90 days, only one man had refused to accept re-education. The Central Committee considered the pilot project a huge success and promoted Morejon to first lieutenant. In 1964, the committee decided to adopt Morejon's plan for all 6,000 prisoners at the Isle of Pines, renaming it the Camilo Cienfuegos Plan. There was a touch of irony in naming the slave labor program after Camilo Cienfuegos. Cienfuegos had been a famous commander under Castro. During the revolution, he fought bravely against Batista's government, earning the title of Chief of the Revolutionary Army. When the new government decided to strip all former soldiers and officers of all their rights, Commander Cienfuegos, along with a number of other career military men, protested this as grossly unfair. If we don't want to use them in the new army, fine, retire them. But many of these men have been in the army for more than 20 years. They deserve better treatment, Cienfuegos argued. I cannot deprive them of what is theirs. When another high-ranking officer, Commando Hubert Matos, chose to resign from the revolution because of the unfairness, Cienfuegos was ordered to arrest him. He flew his private plane to Matos' estate in Camagüey, but after a short conversation, Cienfuegos chose not to arrest the man. The popular saying that the revolution is a monster that devours its sons proved true, for Commando Cienfuegos never returned home. His plane disappeared mysteriously, and he was reported dead. Years later, the man who championed fairness in the new government was honored as a hero by having Castro's 20th century slave labor plan named after him, and the Isle of Pines became its testing ground. The next morning at 4 a.m., the gallery lights flashed on, and the guards shouted at us to get up. I stumbled to my feet, dressed, and fell into place in line. After roll call, the guards ordered us to breakfast, where we were again given a portion of the milk mixture. I had just finished eating my bowl of gruel when I heard them call out my block number 8. For reasons unknown even to me, I began softly humming the words to the hymn, "When the roll is called up yonder." I chuckled and then snapped back to attention, since those who hesitated or forgot their numbers suffered the unpleasant consequences of a rifle butt alongside the head or a bayonet stab in the thigh. The guards herded us into trucks like cattle and drove us to a field of elephant grass. Before we disembarked, a smaller truck filled with soldiers drove up behind us. The soldiers took their posts along the perimeter of the field. The sergeant in command, Luis Sanchez, ordered a corporal to open the doors to our vehicle. The farmer in whose field we were to work that day stood off to one side as the prisoners climbed out of the trucks and fell in line to be counted. After the count, the soldiers walked down the line handing out machetes. When the sergeant ran out of machetes, he informed the rest of the prisoners that they would roll the grass cut by the first prisoners into bales for the farmer to use as hay. The sergeant oversaw the work in the field and told the soldiers when to beat, stab, shoot, or kill a prisoner. Occasionally during the day, one soldier or another would hide behind a bundle of hay to harass us with his rifle as we worked. We quickly learned that any change in the guard's routine sooner or later meant trouble. At times, when prisoners were allowed to either write or receive mail from their families, the sergeant also spent part of his time sitting under a nearby tree, reading the letters and deciding whether or not they'd ever be delivered. Each day, we worked until noon, whereupon Sergeant Sanchez blew a whistle to announce lunch. One by one, the line of prisoners inched past an inspection point where a corporal handed each of us a metal plate, and the next soldier plopped a glob of sickly white mush onto the plate. I took my food and walked to the spot where the guard indicated and sat down to stare at the strange-looking stuff I was supposed to eat. To eat the unflavored, overcooked mush, one had to cut into it like pudding. The prisoners were not allowed to talk one with another, but my neighbor hissed, "What's this stuff supposed to be?" "I think it's macaroni," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "At least it looks like macaroni, I think." At the end of the break, the sergeant sounded his whistle and we lined up for a head count. Once certain that none of the prisoners had escaped during the break, the sergeant ordered us back to work. The stifling afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on our sweating bodies, causing our backs to burn and blister. Weakened by malnutrition and torture, the prisoners hacked away at the elephant grass until 7:30 or 8 at night. Before returning to the prison compound, the guards conducted another head count in the field and a final roll call back in the prison courtyard. About 10 p.m., we straggled to our cells for a short night's sleep. The first night, I lay awake on my cot for hours. My unused muscles screamed from the abuse I'd given them that day. However, sore, aching muscles were not what kept me from sleeping. Concern over breaking the Sabbath did. While I didn't mind working from Monday to Thursday in the fields, as a Seventh-day Adventist, I knew I couldn't go to work on Friday, since Sabbath would begin at sundown, long before I returned to the prison. I knew I had to do something. But what? Who could I confide in? Spies and prison stool pigeons might overhear us speaking, which would get both me and the person to whom I confided in trouble. The second night, I again struggled with my problem. Should I go to the fields anyway? What would happen if I didn't go? If I refused? I felt weak, vulnerable, and so alone. Yet I knew what I must do. I worked from Monday through Thursday as required. When the block left for the fields on Friday morning, I melted into the shadows of my cell and waited. For reasons I did not know, a few other prisoners also chose to stay behind. "Are you sick?" some of the prisoners inquired. "No," I replied, not volunteering any more information than necessary. "You'll get yourself in serious trouble," another prisoner warned. "I'm sure I'm in serious trouble already," I answered. At first, nothing happened. No guards shouted. No dogs threatened to attack. Nothing. Around 9:30, 2 officers appeared in the gallery and went from cell to cell, questioning each of the prisoners who had remained behind. In a short time, they strode into my cell. "Why are you in today?" one asked. "Do you have a medical permit?" the other inquired. "Are you summoned to the administration office? Are you working in the circular?" Their questions followed one another with machine gun speed and precision. At the end of the questioning, a special lieutenant entered my cell and barked, "Number 30954, I am from the Department of Interior Discipline. You will come with me." He took me outside the building, where I joined a number of other prisoners who had failed to show up for roll call that morning. At gunpoint, he and his armed henchmen marched us to the lake, the prison's open sewer. At the edge, he ordered us to halt. "For not showing up for work this morning, you've been assigned to cut the grass growing inside the pond," the lieutenant informed us, his lip curling into a sneer. "Guards, throw them into the water." 2 guards picked me up by my arms and legs, then heaved me into the ear. I hit the putrid water with a splash. Sinking beneath the surface, I scrambled for a footing on the slime-encrusted bottom. Finally, I managed to swim close enough to the edge that I could get a footing. Nausea from the fumes that emanated from the excrement and other rotting debris engulfed me. I floundered about in the water trying to escape, but there was no escape. Guards, with their rifles pointed, lined the edge of the pond, daring us to even try to climb out. I raised my eyes toward heaven and prayed, "Please, Lord, save me. I can't stand it any longer. How can I possibly survive?" I fought to keep my chin elevated so as not to allow the filth to enter my mouth. I grew tired from the constant battle to maintain my footing. Many of my fellow sufferers gave up trying and later died from terrible infections. One of my very special friends, Samuel Vida Huerta, contracted an infection and died a week later. For you, my Lord, I will fight to stay alive for you. But why, Lord? Where are you in all of this? I cried. God heard me. Immediately following my prayer, my eyes focused on a plant, a lily plant, with a bud growing on the surface of the water beside my face. Fascinated, I watched the bud of the lily plant respond to the morning sunlight. Slowly, with the grace of a ballet dancer, the blossom opened into a pure white lily. A white lily? In this filth? I thought. Impossible. How could any living thing that pure and white come out of this filthy muck? At that moment, the promise found in Hebrews 13 and verse 5 flashed into my mind. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Where was my God, I had asked? Suddenly, I knew that my God stood right beside me there in the sewage, trying to picture the creator of the universe, enduring this quagmire of filth with me, for me. The thought overwhelmed and humbled me. 3 hours later, the lieutenant ordered the prisoners removed from the cesspool. This is only a small taste of what will happen to you if you decide to be a gold brick again. Next time it may be a beating or even a bullet, he warned, before marching us back to our circulars. Heavy of heart, I returned to my cell and considered my fate. The father of lies bombarded my mind with the lieutenant's dire warnings, tempting me to give in to the pressure. The crafty demon devised dozens of ways I could go to the fields in the morning without actually working. Sabbath had always been the joy of my week, but tomorrow would be a trial instead of a delight. Regardless of Satan's temptations, I saw no options. I would have to disobey again and suffer the consequences of my decision. I would not, I could not violate my Sabbath. The day passed. The other prisoners who had gone to the fields returned. After learning of my fate, they drew apart, knowing I would probably repeat the violation in the morning. Would this be my last day on earth? I wondered as I lay staring into the darkness of my cell. After facing an irate officer in the morning, would the next face I saw be that of Jesus, my Lord? Outside, I could hear tiny raindrops hitting the circular's tin roof. Throughout the night, the raindrops grew in number and size, developing into a heavy downpour. From my melancholy state, it was as if all of heaven were weeping with me. I reminded God of His promise about not allowing us to be tempted beyond what we can bear, about providing a way of escape. My mood finally lifted somewhat, allowing me to fall asleep. 4 a.m. arrived, with the glare of the lights and the blare of the megaphones. I got up, dressed, and fell into the breakfast line, where, zombie-like, we proceeded through pouring rain to the ground floor. I glanced up at the dark, heavy clouds filling the sky. Maybe they won't make us go out in this weather, the prisoner next to me suggested. I shrugged my shoulders. I doubted that our tormentors had that much compassion. Yet in spite of myself, a spark of hope danced in my mind. Could the rain be the way of escape the Lord had sent for me this morning? We had barely finished our breakfast when the public address system sprang to life. Block numbers 1, 2, and 3 line up at the transportation area. No luck, I thought. The slave drivers would force the slaves to slog through the mud and pouring rain. The voice called out the next 3 blocks, 4, 5, and 6. I held my breath. They would be calling my block number at any moment. This would be my last chance to change my mind. No, I couldn't reconsider. There was no turning back. After all I'd been through already, I couldn't weaken now. Blocks 7, 8, and 9. I sat rooted to my bunk. A fellow Sabbath keeper, Rosendo Valdez, sat beside me. Come on, he coaxed. Act intelligently about this. Go to the fields. God will understand and forgive you. I shook my head. No. Reluctantly, he glanced at me once, then hurried to take his place for roll call. I listened as the officers checked off the numbers of each of my fellow prisoners. My fingers dug into my flesh as I awaited my fate. And it wasn't long in coming. His voice boomed over the public address system. Where is 30954? 30954. The officer continued taking roll call as I waited in my cell. I knew that hiding was useless. Sooner or later, they'd find me, and I would suffer the consequences. So, I just waited. The sergeant stormed into my cell yelling, "Look here, 30954. You've held up the block for nearly an hour. That is sabotage to the plan and you will pay for it." Then, as an afterthought, he added, "Why are you not in roll call?" "I'm not going to work today," I answered, in as calm a voice as I could muster. He eyed me critically. "Are you sick?" I looked him in the eye. "No, sir. But according to my faith, I cannot work today, Sergeant." "Well," the soldier snarled, grabbing me by the arm, "I have a chief, and he says to take you to the field." "Sergeant, I have another chief, and he says, remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, and do all thy work. So you're not going out?" "That's it. You have said it." I realized that with those words, I had probably signed my death warrant. The sergeant turned abruptly and walked out of the cell. A few minutes later, he returned with a stern-faced captain. "So you're not going to work?" the captain barked. "Are you fomenting a strike?" "No, sir," I replied. "I told your sergeant that I was not going to work today." The captain glanced at the sergeant, then back at me. "Why?" "Because, sir, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, as you can see on my chart." The captain's face softened somewhat. His stance became less threatening. "Look, I don't want any problem in this block," he explained. "I'm going to be considerate with you. I will take you to the field, but you won't have to work." "That's fine, Captain, but I'm not going out today," I reiterated in a pleasant yet firm voice. He scowled for a moment, then tried again. "Let's do something else. I'll take you to the field and give you a pail. When your mates are thirsty, you can give them water to drink. That's charity, right?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm not going out today." The captain resumed his threatening stance. "Number 30954, it won't be as easy as yesterday for you." Easy, I thought. You call yesterday easy? When I didn't reply, the captain shrugged his shoulders. "Well, you've asked for it." The two soldiers walked out of my cell. An hour later, the captain returned, along with a lieutenant and two other officers. "Number 30954, the lieutenant said, "you will come with us. You will be an example for any other prisoners who might be scheming to strike or to sabotage the success of the program." The officer and the two soldiers under his command took me out into the center of the circular near the base of the tower. The three men each carried a length of electrical cable. The end of each had been splayed into three parts. They turned me to face the tower. I heard the zing of the cables as the officers snapped them through the air. The cables lashed across my back. I fell to the ground. Again and again the cables ripped at my flesh. When I fainted from the pain, one of the soldiers dumped a bucket of water on me to revive me. When I came to, the captain asked, "Are you going to work?" "Not today," I gasped. 3 times the cables whipped across my flesh. 3 times I passed out from the pain, only to be revived with a bucket of water. 3 times the officer inquired if I would now go to work. Each time I thought I would die right there on the concrete. After the 4th beating, the officer again asked, "Are you going to work today?" "No," I said, unable to speak above a whisper. "Just kill me and be finished with it." "Is that what you want? To be a martyr?" He strode past my head, then back again. "We are not that foolish." The officer turned to the other men and snapped, "He's insane, a fanatic." With that, he turned on his heels and left. As I lay in a pool of my own blood, I did not know whether I would live or die. I could not see beyond my pain. After a few minutes, some of the braver inmates sneaked over to me and carried me to my cell. I did not know then that the agony I suffered would ease the way for my brothers who would come to accept the Sabbath day as holy. The gods would call them one of Noble's people and leave them in on the Sabbath. But the gods had it all wrong. They were not Noble's people. They were gods. 2 days later, a guard took me to headquarters where they shaved, fingerprinted, and reclassified me. "Your number has been changed from 30954 to 31450, the prison commander informed me. "You've been reclassified as a dangerous religious fanatic. You and your equally fanatical friends will be transferred to circular number 2. Strutting across his office, the commander turned, tucked his thumbs in the waistband of his trousers, and wagged his head confidently. "We will win, you know. Sooner or later, we always do. We will break up your cult once and for all." The end of chapter 8, entitled "The Caribbean Killing Fields," from the book I Will Die Free by Noble Alexander.